Ethan's heart pounded in his chest as he stood outside the tiny cafe on 14th Street, gripping his phone so tightly his knuckles turned white. Inside, Sophia sat at their usual corner table, her hands wrapped around a steaming cup of coffee. Her face, so familiar, was turned toward the window, gazing at something in the distance. He knew this conversation was coming. It had been brewing for weeks, but the weight of it still pressed heavily on his chest. For a moment, he considered turning around, pretending this wasn't happening. But that wasn't who he was. He took a deep breath, squared his shoulders, and stepped inside. The bell above the door jingled, and Sophia's gaze shifted to him. A soft smile flickered across her face, but it didn't reach her eyes. That was the first dagger to Ethan's heart. This was the woman he had envisioned his future with. The woman who had stood by his side as he talked late into the night about his dreams of building something meaningful, something that would leave a mark. But lately, every time he spoke about his ambitions, he noticed the hesitation in her voice, the tightening of her lips, the way her eyes glazed over as if she were looking at a stranger. He slid into the chair across from her, offering a small smile of his own. "Thanks for meeting me," he said quietly. Sophia nodded, her fingers tracing the rim of her cup. "Of course," she replied, her voice tinged with a politeness that felt foreign. They made small talk for a few minutes, but the air between them was heavy, suffocating. Finally, Ethan couldn't take it any more. "Sophia," he said, leaning forward, his hands clasped together on the table, "we need to talk." She looked down at her coffee, her lips pressing into a thin line. "Yeah," she said after a moment, "we do." The words tumbled out of him in a rush. "I know things have been tense between us lately, and I know it's probably because I've been so focused on my work, on trying to get this platform off the ground. But, Sophia, this is important to me. You know that. It's not just some side project. It's my dream. I just need you to believe in me and what I'm trying to do." Sophia's eyes met his, and there was something in them, pity, frustration, that made his stomach twist. "Ethan," she said softly, almost gently, "I do believe in you. I do. But believing in you doesn't mean I can pretend to believe in this." She gestured vaguely with her hand. "This idea, this gamble, it's just not realistic." Ethan blinked, caught off guard. "Not realistic?" he repeated. His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it now. "Sophia, I've done the research. I've put in the hours. I've seen the potential. This isn't some pipe dream. It's real, and it's going to work." Sophia shook her head, her blonde hair swaying around her face. "But at what cost, Ethan? You're burning yourself out. You're pouring everything into something that might never pay off. What about a stable job, a steady paycheck? What about us?" Her voice cracked slightly on the last word, and Ethan felt the sting of it deep in his chest. "What about us?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm doing this for us, Sophia, for the life we've talked about, the life we deserve. Don't you see that?" She looked at him then, really looked at him, and he saw the answer in her eyes before she even said the words. "No, Ethan," she said, her voice firm now. "You're doing this for you, and that's fine. But I need something else. I need someone who's grounded, someone who isn't always chasing the next big thing. I can't spend my life waiting for you to make it." The words hit him like a punch to the gut. "You're asking me to settle," he said, his voice shaking with a mix of anger and disbelief. "To give up everything I've worked for, everything I believe in, just so we can live some cookie-cutter version of a life. I can't do that, Sophia. I won't." She sighed, looking down at her coffee again. "Then maybe we're not right for each other," she said quietly. Ethan stared at her, his mind reeling. He had always imagined they would argue, maybe even break up, but not like this. Not with her calmly dismantling everything they had built together, piece by piece. "So that's it?" he asked, his voice hollow. "You're just walking away?" Sophia looked up at him, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I have to, Ethan. I'm sorry." She stood up, grabbed her purse, and walked out of the cafe without looking back. Ethan sat there for a long time, staring at the empty chair across from him. He felt a strange mix of emotions, anger, heartbreak, betrayal. But underneath it all was a flicker of something else. Determination. That night, as Ethan sat alone in his cramped apartment, staring at the prototype of his tech platform on his laptop screen, Sophia's parting words echoed in his mind. You need to settle for less. The words burned like fire, igniting something deep within him. He had loved Sophia, truly, but her lack of faith in him had shown him something he hadn't wanted to see. He was on this journey alone, and that was okay. He didn't need anyone to believe in him but himself. The next morning, Ethan threw himself into his work with a renewed sense of purpose. He quit his dead-end day job and devoted every waking hour to his platform. It wasn't easy. There were days when he barely had enough money for food, days when rejection emails from investors felt like knives in his back. He worked out of coffee shops, library basements, anywhere he could find Wi-Fi. He coded late into the night, his fingers flying across the keyboard, driven by an unshakable resolve. At first, it felt like he was shouting into the void. No one seemed to care about his platform, a productivity tool designed to help remote teams collaborate more effectively. Investors dismissed it as too niche, and potential users were skeptical. But Ethan kept pushing. He networked relentlessly, pitched his idea to anyone who would listen, and slowly things began to shift. The breakthrough came on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, when a tech blogger with a sizable following stumbled across his platform and wrote a glowing review. Within hours, his inbox was flooded with emails from curious users, and his website traffic skyrocketed. The validation was exhilarating, but Ethan knew this was just the beginning. A week later, he landed his first major client, a mid-sized startup that had been struggling to manage its remote workforce. The deal wasn't massive, but it was enough to give him a taste of what was possible. For the first time in months, Ethan allowed himself to breathe, to feel something other than the constant grind. As he sat in his apartment that night, staring at the signed contract in his hands, he thought about Sophia. He wondered if she would be proud of him, if she would see now that he wasn't just chasing a dream, he was building a reality. But then he shook his head, pushing the thought away. This wasn't about her anymore. This was about him, about proving to himself that he could do it. And as he looked out at the city lights, a small, determined smile spread across his face. This was only the beginning. Ethan's name was everywhere now. Articles called him the visionary CEO defying all odds and the young black tech entrepreneur redefining remote work. His platform, Synergy Core, was no longer just a niche productivity tool. It had become a staple in the tech industry, embraced by startups and Fortune 500 companies alike. At 25, Ethan had achieved what most people only dreamed of. He was a millionaire, the owner of a sprawling downtown loft, and a frequent keynote speaker at industry conferences. But most importantly, he had built it all on his own terms. Yet success was a double-edged sword. There were days when the past clawed its way back into his thoughts, whispering reminders of the people who hadn't believed in him, of the person who hadn't believed in him, Sophia. It had been 2 years since that conversation in the cafe, but her parting words still lingered in the corners of his mind. Not in bitterness, but as a reminder of how far he had come. He had buried his feelings for her deep beneath the grind of building his empire. He told himself that he didn't need closure, didn't need her validation. But a part of him always wondered if she'd seen what he had become, and if she regretted walking away. Ethan leaned back in his sleek, ergonomic office chair, gazing out the floor-to-ceiling windows of his company's headquarters. The skyline stretched out before him, a testament to how far he had risen. His assistant knocked lightly on the door before stepping in. "Ethan, I've got the preliminary details on the partnership meeting with Nexus Solutions tomorrow," she said, placing a file on his desk. "They're very keen on integrating Synergy Core into their workflow. It could be a huge deal." Ethan nodded, flipping through the file. Nexus Solutions was a corporate behemoth, known for its conservative approach, but desperate for innovation in the remote work era. Securing a deal with them would cement Synergy Core's place at the top. His assistant hesitated before adding, "Oh, and their account manager, she's requested to join the meeting personally. Sophia Adler. Does that name mean anything to you?" The name hit Ethan like a cold gust of wind. He froze, his hands tightening around the edges of the folder. "Of course it did." "Yeah," Ethan said, his voice even, betraying none of the storm churning inside him. "It does." His assistant seemed to sense the tension and quickly excused herself, leaving Ethan alone with his thoughts. "Sophia, after all these years. And now she was coming into his world, his office, needing his product. He leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. The irony was almost poetic. The next morning, Ethan stood in the conference room reviewing his presentation. He was calm, collected, every bit the CEO that headlines had painted him to be. But when the door opened and Sophia stepped in, time seemed to stop. She looked different, older maybe, or perhaps just more polished, her blonde hair neatly tied back, her tailored suit exuding professionalism, but her eyes, they hadn't changed. For a brief moment, they locked onto Ethan's, widening in shock as recognition dawned. "Ethan," she breathed, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan offered her a polite, distant smile. "Miss Adler," he said smoothly, extending his hand. "Welcome to Synergy Corps." Her lips parted as if to say something, but she caught herself, shaking his hand with a hesitation he didn't miss. She introduced herself to the rest of his team, her voice steady, but Ethan could see the slight tremor in her hands as she set her briefcase down. He watched her carefully throughout the meeting, noting the way she avoided his gaze, the way her posture stiffened whenever he spoke. The presentation went flawlessly, as expected. Nexus Solutions executives were eager to move forward, but before they left, Sophia lingered, waiting until the room was empty. Ethan was packing up his materials when she finally spoke. "Ethan," she began, her voice soft, tentative, "can we talk? Just the two of us." He glanced up at her, his expression unreadable. For a moment he considered brushing her off, giving her a taste of the indifference she'd shown him years ago. But curiosity, or maybe something deeper, got the better of him. "Sure," he said simply. They found a quiet corner in the office lounge, far from the prying eyes of his team. Sophia clasped her hands together, her gaze fixed on the floor. "I don't even know where to start," she admitted. I had no idea this was your company. When they said we'd be meeting with the CEO, I never imagined." Her voice trailed off, and she looked up at him, her eyes pleading. "Ethan, I'm so sorry." He leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms over his chest. "For what?" he asked, his tone calm but cold. "For doubting me? For telling me to settle for less? Or for walking away when I needed you most?" Sophia flinched at his words, her shoulders sagging under the weight of his accusation. "I deserved that," she said quietly. "I know I did. And you're right, I doubted you. I was scared. I couldn't see your vision, and I was wrong. I see that now." Ethan's jaw tightened. He wanted to believe her, to believe that her apology was genuine, but part of him couldn't shake the memory of her condescending tone, the way she had dismissed his dreams so easily. "Why now, Sophia?" he asked, his voice softer but still laced with skepticism. "Why are you apologizing now? Because you see the success? Because it's convenient?" She shook her head, tears glistening in her eyes. "No, it's not like that. I've followed your journey, Ethan. I've seen everything you've accomplished, and I've never stopped regretting how I left things. I was wrong to doubt you, and I was wrong to walk away. Her voice broke. "I just want the chance to make it right." Ethan stared at her, his emotions warring within him. He had dreamed of this moment, of seeing her again, of hearing her admit that she had been wrong. But now that it was happening, it didn't feel the way he thought it would. Her apology didn't erase the years of struggle, the nights he had spent questioning himself, the pain of her rejection. He took a deep breath, leaning forward. "Sophia," he said carefully, "I appreciate your apology. I do, but you need to understand something. What you said to me, what you did, it broke me, but it also made me. I wouldn't be where I am today without that heartbreak. So, in a way, I guess I should thank you." Her eyes widened. But before she could respond, he continued, "But that doesn't mean we can go back to what we were. Too much has changed. I've changed. I can't let myself fall back into something that nearly destroyed me." Sophia nodded slowly, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I understand. I'm sorry, Ethan, for everything." He stood, offering her a hand to shake. "Take care, Sophia. I wish you the best." She took his hand, her grip lingering for a moment before she let go. And just like that, it was over. That night, Ethan sat alone in his penthouse, staring out at the city lights. For the first time in a long time, he felt free. He hadn't succeeded to prove Sophia wrong, or anyone else for that matter. He had succeeded because he believed in himself, because he refused to let anyone dictate his worth. As he sipped his drink, a small, satisfied smile spread across his face. He didn't need closure from the past. He had already found it in the quiet triumph of knowing he had built a life he was proud of. And the best part? He was just getting started.